day about more on the Hannibal Directive ordered by Israeli commanders to have their troops fire on Israeli civilians on October 7th. And you've prepared, a presentation here about that report and these findings. And so let's get into it.
Okay, thank you very much, Nora. Do you remember this video from the aftermath of the 7th of October assault? Hundreds of destroyed cars were rounded up by the Israeli military and later piled up in a car lot in Netivot, an Israeli settlement near Gaza. Would it shock you to learn that much of this destruction was caused not by Palestinians, but by Israel? If you're one of our regular viewers or listeners, this won't come as a surprise. But now, a major new investigative piece by two Israeli journalists shows that official Israeli estimates have privately concluded that at least 70 of these vehicles were blown up by Israel. That is to say, by helicopter gunships, drones, or tanks. Many of these vehicles, driven by Palestinian fighters on their way back to Gaza, contained Israelis that they had taken captive. This new piece that you can see here was published in 7 days, which is the weekend supplement of the mainstream Israeli newspaper Yediot Ahronot. And this piece confirms what we've been saying all along, which is that Israel reactivated the Hannibal Directive on the 7th of October. Journalists Ronan Bergman and Yoav Zitun wrote that it is not clear at this stage how many of the captives were killed due to the operation of this order. That is an order to the Air Force that they should prevent return to Gaza at all costs. And a quote from the article, "At least in some of the cases, everyone in the vehicle was killed," the journalist explained. Now that, of course, would have included many Israeli captives. Now, the paper's online version, Ynet, has not translated the piece into English. So we asked our longtime professional Hebrew translator and Israel expert, Dina Shunra, to translate it for us. So all quotes of the article that I'm reading now are taken from that translation, and you can read it in its entirety at the end of this report that I've written at the electronicintifada.net. So we'll put a link to it in the description for this episode. Now, Bergman and Zitun's investigation found that at midday on the 7th of October, Israel's Supreme Military Headquarters ordered all units to prevent the capture of Israeli citizens, quote, at any cost, unquote, including by firing on them. Quote, at midday of October 7th, the IDF instructed all its fighting units to perform the Hannibal Directive in practice, although it did so without stating that name explicitly. End of quote. As the Israeli piece explains, and as we've reported in detail recently, the Hannibal Directive was established in 1986 after the capture of 2 Israeli soldiers in then-occupied southern Lebanon by fighters from the Lebanese resistance group Hezbollah. The secretive Hannibal Doctrine is named after an ancient Carthaginian general who poisoned himself instead of being captured alive by the Roman Empire. Now, Bergman and Zaytoun say that the original wording of the Hannibal Directive ordered Israeli forces to, quote, halt the capturing force at any price, and that, quote, in the course of a capture, the main task becomes rescuing our soldiers from the captors, even at the price of hitting or injuring our soldiers, end of quote. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that the concept of rescuing Israelis by shooting at them is an interesting one, to say the least. In 2016, the Israeli military claimed that the Hannibal Doctrine had been revoked or at least clarified, depending on which reports you believe. But as we've been saying for the past 4 months, all indications were, in reality, that Israel had revived the Hannibal Directive and has been using it to kill Israelis since the Palestinian military offensive that began on the 7th of October. Bergman and Zaytoun's new article is the first confirmation, by Israeli media no less, that there was a specific order from the top of Israel's military hierarchy to reactivate this suicidal military doctrine on the 7th of October. Bergman and Zaytoun's article says that at midday on the 7th of October, the Israeli military, quote, decided to return to a version of the Hannibal Directive. They write that, quote, the instruction was to stop at any cost any attempt by Hamas terrorists, I'm quoting from them, to return to Gaza using language very similar to that of the original Hannibal Directive, despite repeated promises by the defense apparatus that the directive had been cancelled, end of quote. Now, none of this means that the attack that began on the 7th of October was a false flag, or even that Palestinians didn't kill any civilians at all. But what it does mean is that, in the words of another Israeli article, which we reported on last month, quote, casualties fell as a result of friendly fire on October 7th, but the IDF believes that beyond the operational investigations of the events, it would not be morally sound to investigate these incidents due to the immense and complex quantity of them that took place. An immense and complex quantity of friendly fire, but neither was, that's what it says there. It says that there was an immense and complex quantity of friendly fire. It's an interesting idea. But neither was the 7th of October a massacre of Israeli civilians by Palestinian terrorists, the way it's being portrayed by the mainstream media. Rather, it was a carefully calculated military offensive planned for possibly as long as 2 years in advance. It was aimed overwhelmingly at military targets. Hamas insists that it did not aim to kill civilians, but that some faults may have occurred.